So I titled this as a little subtitle here, Bad Presentation Makes Good Company Look Bad. And then there's a little implication there. A good presentation about a bad company will at least let you know that your company needs to get improved, right? This is an iteration model that we go through when we're doing this kind of investing. Just because a company isn't quite right now doesn't mean it won't be right in the future, right? So that's what I'm trying to do. So why do we want to do this? My desire is we want to get to better presentations so we can get better communications, so we can get to better investments, and ultimately investments are about exits, right? It's not a scholarship, as we say. So this is the deal about better presentations, right? More clearly getting across. Now, a little bit about me and while we go through this plan to get there. As Lindsay said, I'm currently chair of North Bay Angels. I started volunteering with the North Bay Angels. I was not an accredited investor at that time back in '98. And I have literally seen well over 1,000 investor presentations at this point. And I've gone through a huge amount of frustrations. You know, it's terrible. You go to a major event sometimes. Any possible event is a big deal for a prospective company. And you watch a presentation go out where they get 3 out of the 5 things they got to get done right. And they miss other parts. And it's really your only one opportunity to get somebody interested. So I went through and thought, okay, what are the ones that I see that really work? When the company leaves the room and we're racking and stacking about who gets invited to the meeting, etc., we sit there and say, well, this was great. What about this? There was no information here, etc. So that's what I'm trying to get through. So what I want to do for you guys is I'm going to break all my concepts down into 3 parts, which is what I feel, my opinion, what has to be in your presentation. All right? Some people will call some of the things controversial, but I think these are pretty common stuff that you just have to have in your presentation some way, somehow. Now, what I'd like to give you is, after being, in dozens and dozens of private conversation groups when the entrepreneur leaves, what do the investors think? What are they really asking about when they say you need to have this in your presentation, right? And then finally, I'll give you my personal view after seeing hundreds and hundreds of pitches. I will also send these slides to you, and then I have my email address on the last slide. So I want to dig in just a tiny bit more, a little bit of my background. I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. We built companies, went through all the parts about running out of cash and the terrible things there, and products that were almost ready for the market, but unfortunately were already released on the market. Products that were a little bit ahead of the market, products that were awesome and really made things go well, selling companies, all that kind of stuff. So I grew up in that kind of environment. In '99, I took over a company called Sonoma Design Group that we had founded. We grew that company up rapidly, sold that in 5 years to L3. I then became a Fortune 150 executive for 5 years and spent that time merging those multiple divisions together. So I went through that part of the process. I left that organization 5 years after the acquisition. I'm actually running another startup right now, working on some other board stuff in addition to my board. So I look at this from an entrepreneurial point of view, I believe, rather than an investor point of view, but I've certainly sat in the angel investor seat a significant number of times. So I first want to talk about the landscape. So we have the entrepreneurs. Everybody knows that. This room is mostly dominated by them. We have the investors trying to make stuff grow. And then one of the things that I think gets ignored more than it should be is the process that brought these 2 people together. Sometimes that process is super informal. Hey, I got a buddy, they're working on this, you really should meet her, she's great, and it's a dinner or a cup of coffee or whatever. Sometimes it's very formal. North Bay Investor Summit is coming up. There'll be a very formal process to get there. You have tight regulations on time and all these things you get to do. But in any event, there's a process that brought you guys together. So there's the three things. So first we're going to talk about the entrepreneur. Now, everybody is looking for two things, right? They're looking for funding, but the reality is you need help also, right? So you're usually looking for funding, you're looking to fill in gaps on your board, your advisory board. You might need an executive or 5. You might need an advisor that's willing to help you out part-time for no money or little money. The other thing is that, you know, and people that are savvy in the business, you got to be talking to people that are actually closing, right? Not just have they written checks in the past, but are they currently writing checks, right? Are you in the space that they would all be interested in, right? All that kind of stuff. You have to think about that. It's a challenge. And then the other part that is very difficult is almost everybody gets up and does some number of presentations and has very limited idea about how the funding process works, how deal structures work, etc. People take advice from so-called professionals that haven't raised money, and they give them very solid legal advice. I don't mean that they're just lawyers, but I mean everything they say is true. However, it may not actually work in the environment that you're in. So from our point of view, we spend a lot of time educating on that. Investors. So, look, they're doing this because they want to help people, and they get a charge out of it, right? They've been there, they want to connect with somebody that's got a great idea, they want to watch that idea grow and prosper, etc. You know, this isn't angel investing is not the kind of game where it's like, here's the check, I need to get 10 times my money back in 3 to 5 years, I'm going to yell at you if you didn't. I mean, it's really collaborative, and the people that are involved in it because they love it. Right? And they're looking for great deals. And I used to say good deals, but I actually say great deals, because the deals always get worse after you write the check. So you might as well start out really with a good deal, with people you really like, all that kind of stuff, because the chances that something's going to go wrong, right? And you really want to be able to say, yeah, if this all works together, we have a good chance. And if it doesn't work really well together, we at least might be able to recover, you know? And then the other part that I think is important, there's I believe a fallacy out in the culture that these investors are, going to yell at you. It's going to be this really high conflict meeting, and at least for us, we don't do that. And part of the deal there is you got to take the long view, right? You get a group of potential entrepreneurs in front of you, and you treat them badly. That's no good, because maybe the deal is bad, but maybe they fix it, right? You want them to come back with good deals, right? Just because it's bad doesn't give you an opportunity to say, well, I'm going to be mean to these people for no reason, right? The problem with that is I often see first-time entrepreneurs who think that because people aren't yelling at them, that their idea is great. All right? And, there's a little bit of a challenge there, right? Because people will be polite, but that doesn't mean your deal's great. And a lot of times, we'll tell people pretty directly, you need to fix these things. And sometimes they get it, sometimes they don't. That's the coachability of it. But I will also say that, every investor that I know has more people looking for help than they have time. So you got to be respectful of time. They're going to jealously guard their time. You got to manage that. Process. Okay. There's a process that got you to the table. You want to respect that process. I've gotten so many calls from people who say, yeah, but we're really special. We don't need to go through that, right? It's like, if you possibly can, do it out of respect for the people that brought you there, right? If it's really outside and there's really good reasons, then everybody's inspired to try to figure out a solution. So it's a win-win, right? But when people just don't want to go through the process because they think they're too good for it, that doesn't bode well. Thank you for the intro to the next stage. So with the theme music, what we have here is, now I'm going to go into the actual what needs to be in your presentation. So the first thing that I think is really important for people to do is respect the landscape that they're going into and understand that. Now I'm going to talk about what needs to be in your presentation. I will also say that when I wrote the investment hypothesis, I use a stage gate development process for anybody that's familiar with that. And I'm going to have to not pull that. And when I was at the last stage on the company that I'm running right now, we went through and did a full investment hypothesis. And we used this presentation as the basis for that investment hypothesis. So this is really kind of an understanding of the business. It is the presentation. It's the understanding of your business and the ability to communicate that business at a very surface level to a group of prospective investors. What you're trying to do in your investor presentation is get a conversation started, right? You get somewhere between, 10-ish minutes. At the NBA, we give you 25 when you're up in front of the whole group. You get 20 in the screening committee. You're trying to present enough credibility in that and enough interest that you can get a conversation started and get to the next level of that process. All right, you do not, the best you can get to is people decide that they're interested enough to write a check. All right, interested enough to consider writing a check, is the actual what I mean. That they don't make the decision to write the check down. All right, nobody's that good and they shouldn't be because, fooling and their money situation, right? So, these slides are about, first slide that I think is great, the best ones that I see are the ones that hit your entire business plan, their entire interest of why should you even pay attention to me for the next 10 to 20 minutes. And they get that across in one slide. Best one of these I saw was written by a former entrepreneur in residence that had been through a decade in VCs. Got the entire reason that an investor should pay attention to him for 20 minutes across in one slide. What was awesome is half of it was a picture, and there was 4 lines. It's like, all right, you got it. So, in my view, you want to say one slide that says it's all. It's a brief description of the company, the product, and the investment, right? Those are the things that people are concerned about, right? I see a bunch of presentations that are awesome about the company or awesome about the product, never mention the investment. So what do we do now, right? So what are the investors thinking? Is this team focused enough that they can capture their attention in one slide? Do they really get it? Do they really know what they're trying to do? And can they articulate it, right? It really comes down to, there's that old cliche about write your movie synopsis on the back of your business card and hand it to them. You can't do that. You don't know what the movie's about. It's not totally different from that. And then, in my view, it's a test of focus. It's very simple. Do you really get it? You see a lot of people that come out there. There's a difference between saying, this is all the stuff my company could become were it successful, and saying, but in order to get there, I need to get to this point to be successful, right? And that's the focused decision, right? So, Martha Stewart changed the game and all the media stuff and all that a decade, 2 decades ago, right? But she got there doing one step at a time, not by coming out and let's go on angel money and try to create this giant empire right out of the box, because it isn't going to work. So test of focus, and then I love the Pascal quote, who I believe actually did that original quote, which is sorry that I had to write you such a long letter. I didn't have time for a short one. You remember that one. But it's true. It's really easy to just blog some stuff out there and come up with this big dense slide. It takes time to say, okay, what's really important? So, overview slide I think is important because you're trying to just get people to pay attention and not look at their phone for the next 15 minutes. That's what you want to do. All right, the pain and the market fit. You know, this one, all this stuff will seem super obvious, all right? The only thing that I think is shocking is the amount that you don't see this stuff in. All right, you gotta understand that you understand the market. You gotta show that you understand the market, and the market is large enough to support the plan. Now what that means is a little subtle. So, you know, going out there and saying, I'm gonna be a $10 million company in a $10 billion market, you're probably not, right? You need to be maybe a niche player. Maybe you can be a $10 million company in a $50 million market. That might work, all right? So it's got to be appropriate. You're not going to be a $1 billion company in a $10 million market. So, and then the market dynamics will support a new entrant, which is always a little tricky, all right? So what are the market dynamics here? How do people make sales? How does a new entrant come into the market? You have to show that you understand that there's room in the marketplace for you and you can get there in a reasonable amount of time. A great example comes down to medical devices, right? Medical device market dynamics, you don't start making money right away. It's a heavily, heavily regulated industry. You have to show how you're going to get there and not run out of money. What investors are thinking. So a big question comes up to, you know, so so-and-so explained that, you know, this is a $500 million a year market. They think they can be a $50 million company. They're addressing this pain point. Is it painful enough for them to part with their cash? I mean, that's debated, right? The reality is the startup companies go out there and test that, and that's a little bit of the more gambling side. You just can't predict exactly enough. Another question is, do those customers that it's painful enough for them to part with their cash have the cash in the first place? Right? Are they the ones, are both of those sides of the equation working out? And so in my view, a big thing that I personally think shows teams that stand out in execution are the ones that can predict where a market's going to go. They don't tell you about the market today, they tell you why it's like it today and what it's going to be like in 1 to 3 years. When they enter, new technology comes in, they can tell you where it's going. Those are the people that you say, okay, I think you guys really get it. The other part about pain and market fit, for lack of anywhere else, you got to look at customer acquisition here and say, okay, if the pain's really, really high and they have a lot of cash, they probably have really low acquisition costs. If the pain's not so bad, you know, customer acquisition can be a problem. And we look at this especially with SaaS companies. The problem with a SaaS company is when you sell one license to your software, that person expects that you have a full operational company, right? And you're charging them whatever it is, 10, 50, $100 a month, right? So you're effectively financing their development. Now the SaaS companies are awesome when they're working for you because you're making really high profit margins. But you've got to recognize you're funding your customers. And so then customer acquisition really gets to be a problem. Okay, competition. Other obvious things. You must show that your product is differentiated and superior. Not just different, but better. And I personally, you know, show your composition is both strong and weak. Say, look, we respect our competition. They're not all a bunch of idiots. They're really strong in this area. They're weak in this area. We want to focus where they're weak and they don't care about so much. Let's go after that. Right? So, what investors are thinking? Big debate. People come out and say, I'm going to launch this product, and company X that already has 50% of the market, they're too stupid to do anything. They're not going to do a thing, and they're just going to let me take all this market, and I'm going to be as big as company X in 3 years. Like, really? That's probably not going to work out. So that's the part where you want to talk about where you can predict the market, and it's also the part where, you know, we look at does this group really respect its competition? And do they know what they're going to do and what they're going to do in response to what they're going to do? Right? The other part about competition, and this is back to the pain point really, but is doing nothing an option? Meaning, is the pain not really hard enough that somebody's going to just say, you know what, not that big of a deal. I could go out and buy a product X, or I could spend an hour in my garage banging something together, and it's good enough. All right, and then another one of our favorites is there's no competition. No one is doing this. Really? If you believe in anything close to an efficient market, then either there's no market, or you've magically hit this little tiny period of time where nobody else has figured this out. And you're the first one and you're right there. Where this really is wild is when you actually do this stuff and you see a lot of these every month, and you see 3 teams that all tell you they're all doing the same thing. We won't disclose to them, and that's just not fair, right? But they come in and they all say, we're the only people doing this. No, you're not. We saw 2 other people already. But we don't disclose, that kind of information. So really be careful about the no competition thing. And then, in my view, I'm competitive, right? I don't care that there's no competition. It worries me if there's no competition. Just what's your strategy to beat them? That's what's more fun. That's where you can win. And how realistic is the competition as the customer sees it? A lot of people come in with a market view of competition, not as the customer. And this goes back down to the idea of doing nothing an option, right? Sometimes people just look at it, and the whole maker DIY type of people, that's a really interesting thing because one of the great ways, if you can sell your alpha product to a maker community, they love to find bugs and fix them and help you, which is great, but most other markets don't work that way. So the idea from that community is they'd rather make something themselves than buy your product in many cases, because it's just cooler. If I had a Saturday project, I did. And then last thing, careful about the word dominate. I've luckily been fortunate enough to go through the DOJ antitrust review when you sell your company, and it was explained to me by our investment banker that they were going to look through all my slides and look for anything where I talked about how we made the evil laugh and then we were going to dominate the world. And she really did say, you have to tell me if you ever use the word dominate the market in any of your slides. So that apparently has some baggage.